Hello and welcome to our second web chat that we are doing as part of Mental Health Awareness Week. And today, Erica, Burke, and I are going to be talking about domestic abuse and the responsibilities and some of the things that employers can do to support their staff. Just to put in that caveat, it's a very sensitive subject, so please be mindful about your own mental health and well-being. Um, and if it is too much, please do stop, take care of yourself, and then feel free to come back to the video when you feel that you're able to do so. So let's jump straight in. So it's something that I'm really familiar with because of my criminal justice background in terms of I'm aware of how prevalent it is. But Erica, why would you say that domestic abuse has started to come into the workplace as a subject?
Well, I mean, as we know, it's been around for a very long time, and I think the pandemic has created a situation where even more people have felt the need to seek assistance.
Yes.
I mean, certainly during lockdown, it calls to domestic abuse helplines from people seeking support increased by 9%. Now, even the government has started to take note about the impact of individuals who are experiencing domestic abuse, taking time off work, they're not as productive. And actually that's costing, I think, an estimated £14 billion each year in lost working time. So, and obviously in the recent, the pandemic, if you like, situation has become much worse. And what we're saying is as people are going back into work now, we really need to take the opportunity to think about how we can reduce that lost working time.
And it's really interesting because we historically it's never seen as having an impact on work in that sense, has it? So it's really interesting because we know it's costing employers, we know it's costing the economy money, let alone the whole, like I said, the criminal justice process. But in terms of lost days through work, injuries, people needing additional support, the changes that need to be made. So yes, it's really important.
Yeah, and lots of employers. I mean, there's lots of employers who are doing some good things at the moment. I mean, only 5% I think have an actual policy and guidance in place.
That is shocking.
Yeah, but for many people who are experiencing it or have experienced domestic abuse, the workplace might actually be the only place they get some respite.
Yeah.
So really and truly, it would be a good thing for employers to be able to support those individuals as much as they possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I've got a question for you, Asha.
Mm-hmm.
How would you actually define domestic abuse? Because we all think we know what we're talking about here, but just to make sure that we're on the same page, can you help us with that sort of a definition?
Yeah, sure. So it used to be back in the day that we used to use the term domestic violence, and that term was then changed to domestic abuse simply because it was about enabling people to see going beyond the physical connotation of violence. And so domestic abuse, which I actually found you defined it very lovely in your blog that you wrote. So I've actually lifted it from that. So domestic abuse is defined as an incident or a pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening behaviour, violence or abuse to those who are aged 16 and plus, who have been or are in intimate relationships with their partners or family members. And the key thing to remember is it doesn't talk about gender, it doesn't talk about sexuality. So it's about recognizing that it's one person to another, irrespective of who they are. And this can include, and it's not limited to, what we've always sort of recognized, but the physical, psychological, emotional, sexual, and financial. And yeah, so the definition is broad for that reason, because coercion can take place in so many different ways.
Yeah, no, I understand. I see.
Yeah, and so I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later about this policy, but in terms of yourself as working as a HR consultant, have you had anybody in terms of staff approaching you for support with domestic abuse in the work?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, sadly, I have. I mean, I remember one occasion where the victim's ex-partner kept turning up at our workplace. And luckily, she had told us about the difficulties that she was experiencing.
Yeah.
And our security teams were put on alert to prevent access to the building. And one of the things we also did was we agreed flexible working arrangements with the individual, which allowed her to vary her working patterns. And the thing is, you see, domestic abuse wasn't really talked about outside of the occasional incidents. And as a HR professional, we weren't especially proactive, I don't think, about developing strategies to support victims or survivors, or in fact to help other members of staff who, you know, those individuals may well have confided in, and they didn't quite know what they were supposed to do about it. So I'm really pleased that we're starting to talk about this now so that we can do much better than we have done in the past.
Yeah. And I guess what you were just describing there, I mean, the difference you would have made to that employee, you know, that.
Yeah. And she was grateful, and, you know, thankfully, she didn't come to any further harm. And we kept an eye out. But I can imagine in terms of your particular role, Asha, I mean, will you have actually had to deal with victims or survivors of domestic abuse?
Yeah, I mean, I've had lots of clients who come to see me, and it doesn't start off them talking about that they're subject to domestic abuse, or that they're surviving domestic abuse, or whatever the term might be that somebody might want to use to describe their situation. They tend to come to see me for other things, you know, migraines, IBS, chronic pain, anxiety, depression. And usually it's only through those conversations that it becomes apparent to me what it is and what it's about. And it's really difficult for me because obviously the nature of my work is, and I guess also for yourself, the nature of your work is that it's care about people, and we don't want any harm to come to them. And so I'm very mindful that I might talk to them about what options they have available to them. I don't record it. I don't give them anything to take away because, again, I'm very mindful of heightened risks. And like I said, it is difficult, but my job as a therapist, particularly as a hypnotherapist, as a solution-focused hypnotherapist, is to restore them with some faith in their skills and abilities. Because one of the absolute key elements of what perpetrators of domestic abuse do is they absolutely strip their partners of their sense of autonomy, their sense of control. And so my job really is to restore that back to them, and enable them to make the right decision for them. I'm not there to judge, you know. That's not what we're about. And you know, I'm guessing as you know as well as a HR consultant, you know, being very clear that we're not there to judge that person, whether they choose to stay or go, whatever their decisions are. Quite difficult from that perspective. But just sort of, I guess, understanding, as we were talking about earlier, about this particular staff member that you were managing, you know, what can employers do? Because like I said, it's really lovely to see that you've written this blog around what organisations can do. But can you just tell us a little bit more about the policy and how that might be adopted by, say, for example, a small business?
Yeah, of course. Well, the HR department has joined up with the Employees Initiative on Domestic Abuse and collaborated with a woman called Sharon Livermore, who is a former victim. And what has happened is we've created, with some other, you know, Domestic Abuse Alliance and so on, we've developed a new domestic abuse policy and some training for employers so that they can be confident in supporting survivors of domestic abuse in the workplace. I mean, with this Sharon Livermore, you know, her employers didn't know she was using up all her annual leave, you know, to attend hearings and so on. And there was just no sense of, you know, knowledge or understanding in the workplace. So, you know, this is, you know, why we've collaborated with her, and she's sort of spearheading this sort of campaign.
And so what can employers actually do on a practical level, you know, irrespective of how big or small they are?
Yeah, well, you know, raising awareness is a really great start, and absolutely, and having a policy, you know, like one I've just spoken about, will do just that. What I'd say, I mean, you know, out of the policy, the principal advice recommends that employers should, and you kind of got these 4 R's going on, so bear with me, recognizing that there's a problem. So, you know, it's raising awareness so that, you know, if you know your members of staff, and keep your eyes open and see whether they're behaving differently, for example, out of the ordinary, that something's not right, you're recognizing that there's a problem. Secondly, you're responding appropriately. It may be, like in the case with my work colleague, we, you know, arranged flexible working, you know, have a helpline in place, but you give a response that's appropriate to the situation, that you then record the details of any requests for flexibility. Again, this might help if, you know, something is going through the courts or anything, and there's evidence required that the employee required assistance from the employer. So having a record of any requests for flexibility is very helpful. And finally, referring to outside agencies, again, so that, you know, you're not expected as the employer to do all of it, to, you know, to be the expert here. But if you can refer somebody to an outside agency to get some help, that's great.
And I think what you just described there as well, about that raising awareness about the policy, if that's done across the organisation as opposed to solely with managers or leaders, it allows colleagues to be able to start looking out for each other. And again, we're creating that empathetic and compassionate workforce, aren't we?
Yeah.
People start to be able to support each other, which then gives individuals the confidence to come and talk about these issues and look for those resolutions, I guess.
Yeah, and, you know, it doesn't matter about the size of an organisation. You know, domestic abuse can happen to anybody, and as an employer, what you don't want, if you're in a very small team, you know, one person not being present, or not, you know, being as productive as they might be, can have a huge impact. Yeah. So it's really helpful if you've got something in place, if you create an environment where people do or do feel able to talk about it, to get some help, that it actually will help you as well. You're not going to lose that member of staff going off ill or otherwise.
So what kind of things do you think managers, colleagues, pretty much anybody in a business should look out for?
Well, it's, you know, I think with these things, it's, you know, there might be people who are, you know, needed to leave work at particular times, and usually, you know, wearing clothing that's inappropriate for the time of year. You know, somebody just behaving out of the ordinary, not their usual selves, and that does take, you know, a responsibility on managers and others working with individuals to know how they are, to ask them how they are. Just take a general interest. You don't need to get in everybody's personal lives, but just asking an interest and observing is really, really helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really interesting because I find, from my experience of working not only with my clients, but obviously in my previous role, there are so many things as well that can be potentially indicative of things not being great. You know, rapid weight loss, panicking about how much money that somebody might have spent. Substance misuse is also another coping strategy that we're aware of. And also I've had some clients who have said, look, I want some help, but I need to see you face to face, you know.
Okay.
And that's because, again, the home environment isn't a safe place for them to have those sorts of conversations that they want to have. And I should also add, you know, as a therapist, I still have to adhere to governing bodies. And so I still have a safeguarding policy in place for myself as a practitioner. You know, so again, if I felt that somebody was at immediate risk, I would have to action that, because also I have a duty of care to look out for them.
And do you tell them that you might take that action?
Yeah, so what I do as part of my terms and conditions, because it's considered to be good practice, that when people sign up, I send them a copy of my terms and conditions, and it's clearly stated that all our conversations are confidential, unless there is a reason that I believe there is a reasonable concern, that I believe that they're at immediate risk, someone that they know is at immediate risk. And so for that reason, I then must take the appropriate action. So whether that's contacting the GP or contacting the police. But it's very much there in the terms and conditions. I only had one instance that's not been domestic abuse related, where I've had to say to the person, I'm really concerned about what we're talking about. I'm going to be calling you a GP. And we're going to do it together. You're going to stay with me while I make this quick call. And then you know, liaise with them and then pass it on to them.
Gosh, that must be quite difficult.
Yeah, it is, but I'm very clear about, you know, what my boundaries are and where I can support somebody and where I'm crossing my professional boundary. And so that can be quite difficult. But, you know, generally saying, like I said before, you know, I'm very client-centered. It's not my job to tell them what to do. And even if on the inside I'm screaming, you need to leave.
Yeah.
Not for me to share that with them. And I guess also, I think sort of talking about clients wanting face-to-face sessions.
Yeah.
Working from home, which I know you've already touched upon it as well. You know, again, just to be mindful, if you're having those conversations with your employees, your staff, and you're saying, well, do you want to come back into work or do you want to stay at home? You know, what might be their reasoning for wanting to stay at home? Because are they being coerced to continue?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then their partner has what's the word? Unconditional access to them.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
So if that's what that could be about as well.
Yeah, it's quite.
Sorry, you were going to say, Erica.
Yeah, no, I was just saying it's quite difficult, that, isn't it? I can imagine.
Yeah. And I know it's a difficult conversation. My experience, and I'm quite well versed in talking about it. I'm quite familiar with it. And if you're a manager or you're a colleague, that I can imagine could potentially feel quite difficult. So how would people go about raising that conversation, do you think?
I think it is, you know, we keep saying it's really difficult because it actually is really difficult. Yeah. It's such a deeply personal and deeply sensitive situation. And, you know, many managers, you know, just simply aren't equipped to handle, you know, something like that, and they naturally wish to stay away from it. Yeah. You know, I think, you know, we've talked about observing behaviours, you know, asking somebody how they are. That might be the opener. You know, I've noticed that, etc., etc. They may be good openers to get the conversation going, but we have to accept that the individual may not feel able or wish to discuss it, especially if they haven't built up trust in either the manager concerned, their colleague, or with the workplace. And building trust takes time. So that's why, you know, now is a good time to start slowly to create the right sort of environment where, you know, victims do feel able to confide in either their colleagues or managers to get the support that they need. But we do need to give managers training. I mean, I think it's unfair to suddenly put this onto them. They
Yeah,
do need the training.
absolutely. And as mean as this might sound, managers are very much, or traditional managers, if they've kind of gone into it from the perspective of, this is the job that I do, this is how I manage processes, I expect the team to meet these targets. If they don't, this is how I manage, performance. And those conversations are much easier to have, aren't they?
Yeah.
Especially if you've then got somebody who's an absolute potential emotional wreck saying, this is what I'm experiencing. And then I think also I'm very mindful of then making sure that the staff also get the right support, not just the victims that we're talking about, the survivors that we're talking about, but also the managers who were then left going home that evening going, gosh, this is what X said to me, my member of staff said to me. I hope I said all the right things. I hope I did all the right things, because they're not counsellors.
No, and it's a lot. It is, it can feel like an awful lot. And, I'm very conscious that as an HR professional, increasingly, it feels as if we're, expecting managers to be all things to all people. And, it's just reimagining what the role of a manager is.
Yes.
And that manager is about, their responsibility isn't so much the doing of the job, the tasks. Their job is about helping maximize the potential of the team, the people for whom they are responsible, that they are managing. So their responsibilities are, about creating that environment that means that the individuals are as productive as they can be, and as well and as thriving as they can be, because all of that helps the business.
And I think for me, it's also about not just the managers doing it for the staff, but also that there's somebody in place who's doing it for the manager. So it's a real organizational approach.
Absolutely.
If you're supporting a colleague and what they're telling you is really difficult and you're not used to hearing these sorts of things, it's immense. And so then to be left processing that information can be just as impactful on their mental health.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did I do everything I was supposed to do? Did I actually do the right thing? So I think, as much as we're sort of saying that there needs to be that shift in terms of what managers do, and not just manage the processes, but make a thriving team. I'm very mindful as well that it, as we've said, that it needs to be a very organizational approach. So
you can't do it. You can't. None of these things will have any impact if it's not organization wide. No one person can change a situation. So it has to start from the top. And having, in this case, we at the HR department are advocating, employers at least starting with having a domestic abuse policy. It doesn't cost anything. We're providing it for free. There's some supplementary training. That's the start. Whatever size organization you are, it really doesn't matter. So that's something that the HR department has really sort of committed to doing. And if there are any employers who would like to have a policy, then absolutely, get in touch.
You got there before me. I was just about to policy.
I got carried away.
It's okay, I don't mind. So it's a policy that's available and it's free.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so people just have to, get in touch on the website, or just email erica.burke@hr.co.uk, and we'll get a policy across to you.
Fantastic. I think
really helpful. Thank you, Asha. That's been really insightful.
No, thank you. I like I said, at the beginning, I understand that today's conversation is very sensitive. But both Erica and I, it's gone very dark where you are.
It's gone incredibly dark.
What did you do to annoy somebody? But both Erica and I felt that this subject matter was something that really merited some attention, especially with people going back into the workplace. And I know that Erica's blog, you've got a list of organisations that can support.
That's correct. Yes.
As a therapist, I am available, and if you need that support, then please do get in touch with me. As you've already heard me mention, you know, it's confidential. We don't talk about what you're experiencing. It's a very strength-based, empowering approach. Again, just thank you so much for taking the time out to watch this. Tomorrow we are covering parental and carers burnout. So please do feel that you can take some time out and join us, and have a fantastic day.